Let's see what Tim McKibben, CEO of the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales, has for us this week. Tim, over the last couple of weeks we've been talking about the process of buying a property, and I know that there are 3 areas that you need to be concerned about with regard to what you look into for the property. What's the first one?
Well, I suppose the first one is the title itself, the land, if you will. So your conveyancer will and or your solicitor would be having a look at that particular quality of those title, having a look at the things that can affect it and advising you on that. So looking at leases, easements, these sorts of things.
Okay, now what's the second thing?
The structure itself. We're looking at the building, seeing if there's anything that may be wrong with the building, pest and building inspections and that sort of thing.
Now those sorts of things are fairly black and white, relatively straightforward. They're either right or they're wrong. But the third area is a little bit more difficult.
The last one was what's termed, and it's something of a new concept, but nevertheless it's always been there, stigmatised properties.
So give me an example of what you're talking about.
Very, very difficult also because it's so broad. It depends on your cultural background, your religious background, your even superstitions come into this particular area. So it's all those things, I guess, that may impact on us personally about the particular property. And that sort of raises the next question, how do we discover that information?
All right, so have you got an actual real-life example of when this sort of thing's happened before?
Probably the most famous example of that in recent times is there was a property in Ryde where there was 3 people murdered on the property. The purchaser came along and exchanged on the contract, subsequently became aware of that particular incident on the property, those murders, and then decided that that was an issue that, had they known about it, they wouldn't have proceeded with the acquisition.
So is there any kind of law that requires disclosure of any kind of history on a property?
The answer to the question about in relation to a vendor is no, they don't have to disclose this information, but a real estate agent does. So that kind of puts us in a rather odd relationship between the real estate agent and the vendor. The real estate agent says to the vendor, I need to disclose this information, it may not be in your best interest. So again, a really messy area, this, and one that I think we're all sitting here hoping for some sort of resolution. What we need to know is the series of things that need to be disclosed and how we disclose them.
What about if the real estate agent doesn't know the things because the vendor hasn't told them?
Well, in those circumstances, arguably, the real estate agent, if they don't know, can't make the disclosures. But there is an obligation on the real estate agent to disclose what is termed in the legislation, at least in here in New South Wales, material facts.
So how does one find out about these histories?
When you're talking about the title, there's a system how you go and find out. When we talk about there's processes about the building, but I don't know, Margaret. There is no program about being able to go and discover this information. And frankly, I think it is something we need to turn our mind to. We need to decide what it is that should be disclosed and how it should be disclosed.
So I guess if there isn't any clear process that someone can undertake at the moment and there's no clear laws protecting anyone, once again the onus comes back on the buyer. What if the buyer was to say to the real estate agent, please ask the vendor, is there anything at all that they haven't told us yet that might affect our decision to buy this property, including has there been any murders, are there any lunatics living by, and everything you can think of. Surely if you asked your real estate agent that question, they have to go back to the vendor and ask that same question, and then if the vendor doesn't disclose it, it could be a point of law later on.
An interesting question, but I mean you're going through a couple of intermediaries there, and whilst I accept that the purchasers themselves are looking to discover this sort of information, and I have a lot of sympathy for that I really think the answer probably lies in being able to create a system, as we have in those other 2 lines of inquiry, where there is some certainty about process. Now, asking the real estate agent then to ask the vendor who doesn't have the obligations, you can see the problems that may exist there.
So in the meantime, until we do have some kind of a system or a process or a law in place, what do you advise buyers to do?
Well, you've got to do your own research, obviously, in this particular area. So, and again, there isn't any process which I can say to you, this is a foolproof system of going to discover the necessary information.
So for the short term, the buyer should perhaps make a big list of questions, think about everything they can possibly imagine, write them down, send them to the agent, and ask the agent to the best of their ability to make the correct inquiries to find out the answers.
Of the vendor, certainly. Yeah, I mean that is I guess a process, but in many areas in this process, I think the purchasers themselves has a duty to go and discover the information, and that's part of their sitting on their side of the fence, the information they have to try and discover. So I would very much like to see this particular issue debated by government and by the regulator to come up with that system. The problem we have here is being looked at in the United States, and I've had a look at some of that over there as well, and they've got something of a mishmash response to the problem over there as well, so we're taking very little guidance over there.
So Tim, in the event that a purchaser feels that the agent hasn't disclosed what should be disclosed to them, then what recourse do they have available to them?
The first thing is, I guess, to say to the agent, this is my concerns, and deal directly with the agent and say to the agent, this is what I would have expected to have been disclosed to me and it wasn't, and deal with it directly with the agent.
Okay, and if they have no joy there?
Well, there's a licensing body in all states, so if their concerns are such that I guess that's dissatisfied with the initial response from the agent, then they can pursue it through various regulatory bodies. In New South Wales here, it's the Office of Fair Trading, and various other states have similar bodies by different names.